Class 3 of the Walkersville Christian Family Schools Academic Clinics. This is the fundamentals of writing a research paper. I would like to begin this morning with a review of your homework assignment. Obviously today you were to have completed minimum of 75 cards of your research, and by next session we'll want the other 75 cards for a minimum of 150 to be completed. So I would like to go over the specifics with respects to these particular cards, what I'm going to be looking for, and what I had a proper format that you were to use. And so each card, when I pick up a card, it doesn't have to be in order per se. If you have them in order, that's fine, but it doesn't need to be. When I pick up a card, it should have the Roman numeral in the left top corner. In the right hand corner, it should have a code, a capital letter code, for the particular book or magazine article or whatever the resource was that you got. Identify that with a single code. In the lower left hand corner, you're to have keyword or key phrase that helps you digest and clearly identify the nature of the content. And then in the lower right hand corner, you have the page number from it. And then your particular research item should be written in either a quote, paraphrase, or in your own words. I'll read this particular one. There's underneath the little card, you're to let me know if it's a note, quote, or paraphrase. And this card is in perfect form. I will read the item and see if it makes any sense to me. Obviously, if it doesn't make sense to me, later on it probably won't make sense to you because it's disconnected. The key word is French losses at Crécy. And so I have no idea what Crécy is, but it says here, at the Battle of Crécy, the French lost more than 10,000 common soldiers, as well as more than 1,500 knights and nobles. It was a terrible defeat for the French. Okay. Now, that particular piece of information is, this card is an A+ card now. I just grabbed it off the top of somebody's paper, but that particular card is A perfect. If all the cards that person has is like that, it's perfect set of research. Now, I'm just going to go through here and read a few other. Battle of Crécy, 16 charges. Now, it's still at the Battle of Crécy, so this person should have written 16 charges slash or comma at Crécy, okay, Crécy, so that it would be clear to him what battle we're talking about. Genoese crossbowmen. Now, in this particular note, I have no idea if it's Crécy or not. I'm assuming it is because it's in sequence of notes, but your keyword should help you clearly identify what you're talking about when you're sorting things later. Tired at Crécy. Okay. That's an okay type of a key phrase. Later on, it'll be incorporated into some other more strategic statement. So, superiority of the bowmen of Crécy. So, this particular note is rather short, 2 lines. Battle of Crécy proved that bowmen were superior to armored cavalry. Probably it would be useful to have a little more information about that point. Your primary point is the bowmen were superior to armored cavalry. Substantive part of the point is why. What was the significant reason for that? So I go through it. Probably in most cases, this particular, here's another weak card. English Channel. Both English and French forces wanted to control the English Channel. Why? What was the essence? What was the significance of it? When you're taking notes, the key point might be very precise, but if you don't have just a little bit of depth with it, what you're going to have is a lack of depth when you write the paper. The point is it's an excellent card, except that depth is lacking. I'll read another card. King Philip was a brave but not an inspiring leader. He was proud and overconfident of himself. That is your key word is just King Philip. That's not sufficient. King Philip, demeanor, bravery, some concept like that to help zero in what it centers around. And then when you make statements, was brave, not aspiring, what's the essence of that? What are you going to say that kind of illustrates, that clarifies that? Why is that important? What was the essence of that? Okay, so that's the substantive nature as you go. King Edward started the 100 Years' War. Excuse me, King Edward started the 100 Years' War. Again, that's a great, terse statement. Question is, what were the key reasons that you made that statement? Why did he start the war? What was the cause of him starting it? Have just a little bit more substance. What you're going to miss is, if you're a good reader and you've got a photographic mind, you might be able to write your paper off this. But when you start getting 150 note cards and you started to mix all kinds of information from all kinds of directions, you're going to run into a blank. And your paper will take a really severe dip in terms of clarity and focus. It'll lose its kind of meaning in that particular process. So that's probably a great way to review these cards. And we have, obviously, by general estimate, 75 cards. Actually, we have 76 according to specific count by the student. And so that's essentially a quick review of cards. Does anyone have any particular questions? I will review all of your cards individually and talk to you personally about your cards. Anybody have any general questions about the cards? Okay, so the first point here is the cards need to be in proper form. And you have to have 1 point per card. Now, I gave you a really good illustration using this student's cards, how he has 1 point per card, but the reality is those points are so succinct, so tight in their presentation that there needs to be just a little bit more substantive depth so that point is understood. Why is that point there? Question.
In the card, what?
Speak loudly.
Oh, in the card, could you state something? Like, would you want us to state something and then explain? Explain, is that what you're saying? Like you said, someone stated something but then didn't explain it.
Right. There's a difference between usually the male frame of reference and the female frame of reference when we're taking notes. Generally, males like the substantive, distinct, big picture statement, and girls often get caught up in all the little details. And so those are the two types of weaknesses. You're so detailed that it doesn't relate to something, or you're so succinct that you don't have any flavor of what it means. So the essence is, yes, you should have a substantive sense of, this is the point. King Philip was a valiant but not inspiring leader. Okay, now that's the succinct point. But to flesh that out a little bit is going to help you when you're writing your research paper, because you're going to give some color to it, some capacity to comprehend that. So you might continue saying, as illustrated by his willingness to lead his troops directly into charge at the head of the ranks, but his inability to communicate the purpose and cause of the battle, which caused many defections, something like that. So that's clearly 1 point, but it's sufficiently stated with succinctness and clarification so that you understand the point. The idea is, when you're trying to do 1 point per card, I don't mean one sentence per se. I mean that 1 point that's clearly presented, but not 2 points. Now, it could be argued on that last particular card that I was illustrating that there were 2 points in there. He was brave, but not inspiring. You could say, well, brave is 1 point, and not inspiring is another. And it's sort of it's going to be determined by the manner in which you present that card, because the way this student is presenting it, it's easily 1 point. If someone else would present it and make a big thing about him being brave and make another big thing about him being uninspiring and make it distinctive enough, then it would fall into 2 points and you'd make 2 cards similar. That was a great question, and try to remind me to repeat the question in case the audio doesn't pick up the student questions. So any other questions as we go? Next point, remember tips on quotes and summaries. That's just from the last class, the little notes. What are the tips? What's the difference between a quote, a paraphrase, and a note, a summary note? Just remember that you go through it. Clear keywords that summarize content are important. I gave some illustration of that in the students' cards. If your keyword floats so that it doesn't have any distinction, doesn't direct you to a key point of consideration, like the couple of those lack, what battle is he talking about? The keyword was so isolated from the concept that you could have put it anywhere in the paper, as it were, adding the word Clacy because that was the battle we were talking about, or some specific aspect of King Philip. Just putting King Philip down doesn't mean anything. What about King Philip? King Philip's demeanor, that would be potentially one. Now, I do want to make a mention here when you're doing clear keywords and that summarize the content. Be free-flowing with each individual card, because you're evaluating the concept, you're summarizing or writing a note or writing a quote, and then you flip over to the next part, and you're actually trying to get that card into a brief, sharp statement of what that card's about by writing that particular keyword. And so when those keywords are disconnected from the main thought in that card, then it might be accurate. It's about King Philip, but it doesn't build that case. And what happens is the better your keywords are, the more you're managing the whole development of your paper, because everything is starting to fit into patterns and with a purpose. This fits in here for this purpose and this reason. And later on, you'll be able to bring things together with a sense of clarity. Here we call it King Philip's demeanor. Here we call it King Philip's offenses. I'm not making up stuff. And all of a sudden, we begin to pick things out and say, well, I can use a little narrower focus and get all these cards into that concept, and you'll do that as time goes on. And that'll sort of begin after our December class. Clear keywords to summarize content. And then lastly here, proper thesis outline, Roman numerals. And basically, this is where we're headed with respects to today's class. You're going to work on getting that thesis outline recorrected based upon the research, and that's where we're going to spend most of the time today. Any other questions on the note cards? Yes?
As far as the page numbers go, I was kind of wondering, what do we do when it's a website? Like, what do we put down there? I didn't put anything down there because I wasn't sure, does it matter?
Well, specifically speaking, I recognize that websites are potentially difficult to label. So if you're at a website, there's a little identity of where you are on the internet up in your window that's identifying where you got to, okay? At some point when you did your bibliography card, you copied some of that or part of that. All of that or part of that, okay? So pay attention to where you are, because if you're using this website as your general bibliography, and then it's deep and you're clicking on several different pages, pay attention to what happens in that little window, because that would be your page number. That would be different, okay? So you would just put ... and then the little segment at the end, or / the little segment of what that was. And the idea for the page number is you want to be able to go back and find it again. You may have to, and if you don't know how to get there, you could do a lot of labor in just going through the whole internet in that sense of the word. So that was a good question, and it was a good answer too. Probably I should have restated the question. When you're using the internet, use the variable part of the address when you have one. If there's no variable part of the address, just put the letters SIC, S-I-C. That's Latin for it's the same as the original reference, which is the top right number of the bibliography that you've already listed. So the word SIC just means same as that. Or, okay. So today we're going to talk about creating a thesis statement, a thesis outline, and we're going to talk about balance. And most of this information is taken roughly from page 22 of the little booklet that you're utilizing. When we're talking about balance and creating a thesis, an outline statement, I have just a general introduction here. The thesis statement is written as the answer to the original thesis question, and it's based upon the actual findings of your research, and it particularly points to the Roman numeral topic areas, okay? So that's thesis statement. The thesis outline is a modification of the thesis question outline that you've already written based upon your research. Now, some of you had crummy thesis outlines, and I wanted you to rework them just for the sake of doing your research. But what you're actually doing now, you're taking that original thesis question outline that helped you in getting into the research, and now you're going to modify that based upon your research, and it's going to turn around from being questions that you're researching to statements that sort of answer those questions, and we'll go into that. Also, discussion on balance. Balance is having sufficient research for the Roman numeral topic areas, and also balance is corrected by either improving the thesis outline or using additional research. We'll go into these in a little bit detail now. Creating a thesis outline first. The thesis outline is the modification of the thesis question outline based upon your research, okay? So we're headed right first here into the discussion of the thesis outline, and we're going to draw the thesis statement out of that, okay? So that being the case, this step assumes you have completed your research. Now, if you look at your assignment sheet that you have, if you'll notice, your next class with me here is in December 12th in this room, and you're supposed to have all your research cards finished, plus you're supposed to have this thesis outline turned in final form, and also your thesis statement turned in final form. And you want to look at your cards to make sure you have some kind of balance. Now, you may not have balance, and you may have to finish that up after the next class. But it assumes you have completed your research. So you've got another minimum of 75 cards to get done by the 12th, and your need between now and then is to actually get those questions, to get that research done early enough so you can work on this thesis outline and work on your thesis statement. If you are finishing up your last research questions at 11 o'clock the night before class, you are not going to have an adequate thesis outline or thesis statement, okay? So you'll get that, and these are important parts of the homework assignment, so to be prepared for class, you need to have that research done sufficiently ahead of time for you to work on it in these fashions. The third point here is often it's necessary to revise your original questions based upon your research before you create a new thesis outline. First of all, you may have already been told to revise yours because it's inadequate. Secondly, as you started doing your research, you start realizing the shallowness or the angle that you kind of missed in your research, and so you sort of reshape those questions a little bit before you work on writing the answers to them. But I do want you to understand one thing here. There's a process that we're deliberately using. Step one was creating a thesis question. Out of that thesis question, we created other limiting questions that we organized into a thesis question outline. And the purpose of that advanced organization was to give you some meaningful basis of doing your research so that when you're researching, you know, well, this point that I'm reading about right here fits into my paper because I have this kind of question raised and it's under Roman numeral 1. And so you plug it into that specific element. However, after you've been doing your research, you start getting a lot more perspective on your topic. You get more depth and you get more breadth. And so it's necessary to rework these questions before you go into the next statement, and some of you are required to do it because I told you so, but it's important to rework it. Then the next point is the new thesis outline may expand or reduce the original question outline based on the actual research findings. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit more later also under the balance section, but basically what we're talking about is you use these original thesis questions to sort of promote your research. Now you've been doing your research. Now you've finished. You've got 150 cards, 200 cards. And some of these areas that you pointed to in your original thesis question outline, you didn't find anything on, or you found very little. Or you discovered that That's a really minor point compared to the bigger nature of the topic. So you must rework that thesis outline and switch it and turn it into something that is more realistic based upon the actual research that you've done. There's no penalty at all if you make complete major changes. Okay, at this particular point, whatever drove you to get the research cards that you have, now you have the research cards. And in the process of utilizing that research, you must digest what you have, and you must, and your research paper is simply going to be a reflection of that research. So do not feel bad at all if you have to completely change your thesis outline entirely based on the research. We're all different the way we're wired, but it's very possible for you to have a sense of what you want and then to have failed to produce that sense in your actual thesis questions that you utilized. But you did your research and you collected all the information, and now you're going to produce that research, turn it around, and in that process of turning it around, rewrite the thesis outline. Then lastly, make sure that you use your keywords and phrases to give you an overview of your findings. You know, that kind of helps you see. It may very well be that some of those keywords and phrases are going to point you to a reality that I've got all of this under Roman numeral 3, but really this is 2 or 3 significant points, and my original Roman numeral 2 is like nothing, and my original Roman numeral 4 is nothing. So you're going to rework it, and this is what you're going to utilize to kind of get the perspective of what your paper is. Now, obviously, your interest in your topic controls significantly what you retain in the process of your study and research. But it is that retention of that general thought as you've gone through carefully that you're going to be utilizing now to kind of sort through the morass of information you've gathered and begin to sort and organize it. Now, when you're going to create a thesis outline, I have kind of illustrated based on some of the concepts I've had and using the continuation of this other topic that we've been talking about. But if you're creating a thesis outline, the first thing you want to do, number one, finalize your limiting questions based on your research. So this is where you kind of go back to your original limiting questions that you have, and you rewrite them. You rework them. You make them more precise based on your research. It is sometimes very difficult to write limiting questions in a topic area. You might have a low level of skill, a low level of understanding. So go back through those limiting questions and rewrite them. Here's the final draft of limiting questions rewritten for the student's paper. And what you do is you come up with that rewritten batch of information that begins to prepare you for the next stage. Okay, you're rewriting it not because your old questions are wrong, but because you're clarifying wherever that clarification is needed, so that you have the substance and the flow from that. Then you move to the next point, okay? Point 2, when you're creating a thesis outline, point 2 is group your limiting questions into common topics, okay? Again, you've refined these things and you have them grouped. So these 2 limiting questions are similar, talking about why people compromise and how people compromise. Then you have the next level, speaking about Scripture in this case. Where is the Scripture that excludes compromise? How does the Scripture exclude compromise? What are the fundamental doctrines of Christianity that rest on special creation? Again, those things are all similarly related, so you're grouping them together. Third group, the last 3 items. Outward effects of compromise in the Christian's life. Does compromise affect the faith of the next generation? Does Christian compromise affect the surrounding culture? So you've taken your limiting questions and you've refined them. Now you've brought them back into a grouping, and that's the second level of creating a thesis outline. Now the third level then is here. Number 3, group your limiting questions into common topics. And when I get your thesis outline in December, I don't want anything more than this, okay? You don't even need Roman numerals and capital letters at this point. I want you to have, 3 to 5. Now, if you need more, talk to me. Usually more than 5 is too much. But 3 to 5 major headings, and underneath those major headings, the substance that relates to those headings in brevity. Now, what you're going to get is these indented sub points here. They will turn out to be your capital letter A, capital letter B, etc. But what they are is they're composed of you having gone through your cards. You've got 150 to 200 cards. You've gone through your research cards. You've used those keywords, and you've come up with these specific general summary points. The keywords cover that. Now, you might have multiple points underneath each one of these subpoints, but you're not going to show that at this point. The detailed outline we'll talk about in December. We'll move on from there. But this is what I want to see. A final thesis outline. Notice that there are no questions here. There are terse statements that sort of represent the answer. Definitions and examples of compromise. What is being compromised? Examples of compromise. Scriptures that are affected by compromise. Literal interpretations, doctrines. Dangers of compromise. The Christian, their children, their cultural environment. So what we have here, and again, this is literally taking a student work and plugging it into the outline here, so it's done more on your level. This is a student's work. And it's acceptable. It's not the way I would do it, but it gets the point across. It gets you through those processes, okay? So if you don't mind, let me review with you quickly the 3 steps to creating your thesis outline. Number 1, finalize your limiting questions based upon research. Go back to those original limiting questions and go through them, sharpen them, clarify them. If you got to eliminate a couple, eliminate some. If you got to add 1 or 2, add some. But get those limiting questions in final form. Failure to do this makes your next step more difficult. Next step is go ahead and group the limiting questions into common topics. And I just used red boxes here to create the groupings. You can use the same thing. You just take your limiting questions and take a red marker or something or a highlighter and highlight them so that you vary the specific matters. Now, once you've got them grouped together, then you produce a brand new functioning thesis outline. And this will be this thesis outline will become, when it's finally modified in proper form, it'll become basically your table of contents. And so you have it rewritten as a statement of your outline content that you're going to cover. It's logical, it relates together. Now you're ready to go to the next step, which is creating a thesis statement. Now I want you to understand, especially for me, I'm very wooden when it comes to this particular point, but you must use your thesis outline to write your thesis statement. Okay? It's absolutely necessary. You cannot write your thesis statement on your left hand, then go over here and produce a thesis outline on your right hand. And you can't do the thesis statement before you've done your thesis outline. So it's imperative that you understand the thesis statement flows out of your thesis outline. First of all, thesis statements give focus to the paper, okay? When I read your paper, if your thesis question is written properly, it will direct me to the whole content and flow of your paper. Out of that, you will frame the reader's focus so they recognize, okay, these are the main points this paper is going to cover, and it holds them in a brief, precise fashion into their mind. And then as they read the paper, using a proper structure, those key outline points are going to logically flow right out of that thesis statement. Point 2, the thesis statement is written as the answer to the original thesis question. It's also based upon the actual findings of your research. Now, at this particular point, you may have to totally revamp what your original question was, because as you asked this question and did your research and found this answer, you might need to reconsider how to phrase the question properly so that the answer that you found makes sense. For example, if your thesis question was, are apples always red? And you did all your research paper on peaches. And all you realize, I really did about peaches. It really is not about apples. And so you have to change that around. Well, thesis question, well, what did I study about peaches? And you have to kind of take that and translate, well, what's the question I'm trying to answer? So you go through that process. Now, you may think it's a little humorous, but it's actually the way it happens. The students, now maybe they don't switch from peaches to apples, but they often, the research brings up a totally different set of issues. Question?
So using your example, so you can can you go, okay, after you write a paper and you're like, oh, it's all about Peaches, can you change the question to?
Absolutely. Not only can you change it, you must change it to
Okay,
Peaches.
but so you don't have to like rewrite your paper. And
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So the whole point of it is, a research paper is a little bit tricky, especially if you've never done it before, from the standpoint that you're not really always sure what you're looking for. And sometimes you might be trying to look for something that really can't be found, but in the process of looking for that, you find something else, and it's kind of on the topic, or it's interesting to you. Now, obviously, if you go to the point of switching from apples to peaches, you probably just need to go through the rough draft of process of recreating your thesis question and your limiting questions. That's why we have two topics in case you blow one out. But the reality is, at this point, once you've done your research, now you have to subject the whole paper to that research. The research is what you did. It's a research paper. And so the findings of your research have to be presented in a meaningful fashion. And if your original questions and limiting questions are way off target from the actual content of your research, then you have to conform it to it. Now, I've done this class for so many years that I know, number one, that it's very easy for you to have a major difference between the original questions and the actual research. But for you, very often and most commonly, that major difference is often unperceived. You don't realize that it's really not on the same topic that you had. So, by coming to this state of the research, you reevaluate your thesis question and look at the research and recognize that I'm trying to answer this question based on my research. Now, going back for a minute to this section, knowing that I've already done a thesis outline based on my research, I've got something substantial here that I'm going to be utilizing for my thesis statement, okay? I've got something substantial. And the modification of my thesis question is probably going to be something that the last final touches are put on when I'm writing my final draft of the paper. Because you're going to present your thesis question, and if your thesis question came up with a wholly different answer, and they don't even relate, obviously you got to fix it. But you're not going to pitch out your research, you're going to pitch out your original question. So thesis statement, give focus, slow down. Thesis statements give focus to your paper. Thesis statement is written as the answer to the original thesis question based on the actual findings of your research. Then last sentence here, the thesis statement points to the Roman numerals topics, the Roman numeral topics. And as a rule, 1 to 2 sentences are often sufficient for a thesis statement. Rare occasion you might have 3, but once you start getting into 3 and 4 sentences, it comes under great scrutiny because you're probably not being sharply clear with what you're trying to deal with. Point 3, creating a thesis statement. This step assumes, that you have completed your thesis outline with 3 to 5 Roman numerals. And again, I already made that mention earlier, but do not try to write your thesis statement unless you've done your thesis outline. Point 4, each of your Roman numeral statements should be referred to directly or indirectly in the thesis statement. If you have 3 Roman numerals, I should be able to identify a tangible phrase that is directly or indirectly related to those thesis points, okay? It's absolutely essential because that's what a thesis statement does. It sets you up for the primary structure and flow of your paper. Don't forget, you're supposed to be taking notes, and reviewing your notes is a part of your grade, so please ask questions if you're getting stuck along the way, and your notes kind of help you actively get involved with what I'm trying to say. And then lastly here, this sounds funny, but it's true. It happens so often, especially with the flair of the feminine gift of writing. Avoid introducing your topic, avoid flowery lingo, and lengthy detailed statements. That's not a part of the thesis statement. It's also not much a part of the introduction, but it's a little bit, some of the stuff, at least some of the details, is acceptable in the introduction. But your thesis statement is not something that you're writing to set a dramatic stage for presenting your stuff. It's precise concepts that address and satisfy the initial question with a clear answer. Any questions on creating a thesis statement? Let's look at the product, okay? When you went back earlier, I have a great, acceptable thesis outline, okay? Now, we're going to go from this thesis outline, and we're going to create a thesis statement. Excuse me, I got one more thing to say before I go on to the illustration. Quick recap, thesis statement, things to remember. Taken out of your book, page 22. Thesis statement is to express the main point of the report, explain to your reader your attitude to the topic. And attitude really, just let me clarify, your attitude is really your bent. The direction the paper is going is because of the research. You believe that this is the direction that, it's kind of like your conclusion in terms of that particular topic and why you're getting the answer that you're getting it, and then to propose the path that your paper will follow. And when I say propose the path the paper will follow, literally I'm referring back to that thesis outline. You know, that's the path, and this thesis statement needs to let that path be clearly seen. Now, this particular thesis statement is exceptional in relationship to the process. So sometimes it helps to start by saying, my research paper is about, but notice that there's a difference in the font here. Notice I have smaller font. My research paper is about how, da, da, da. And then you get to the content, okay? When you present your research thesis statement, I do not want that phrase in there. My research paper is about, okay? That's elementary, okay? A second grader can do that, you may not. But you can use that phrase to sort of get you started, okay? My research paper is about how compromising between two views on origins, okay? That's the first outline Roman numeral. Compromise. Compromise between two views on origins makes Scripture appear to contradict itself, okay? The contradiction of Scripture, that was the second Roman numeral point, see that? And it has serious repercussions for the Christians, their children, witness in society, okay? What does compromise have as an effect, okay? So that's 3 Roman numeral points. I can clearly identify it, and I'll guarantee you when I read your paper, I had better find your thesis outline in your thesis statement, because that's what I'm looking for. But you can see that these 3 statements are expressing the writer's point of view, where they're taking their conclusion, where they're taking their paper to, but it also clearly touches on the specifics of what the paper is going to cover. So the final thesis statement would look like this. Compromise between two views on origins makes Scripture appear to contradict itself. Also, compromise has serious repercussions for Christians, their children, and their witness in society. 2 sentences, and this is an A+ thesis statement for a student doing their first research paper. Okay? Any questions on thesis statement? Brief recap. The thesis statement comes out of the final thesis outline. The final thesis outline comes from the original thesis question outline that has been clearly reconsidered. You kind of go back through that initial set of limiting questions, you make those limiting questions more accurate to the nature of what the research is you've actually found, and then you go through a process of grouping common points of those limiting questions, and then you produce a substantive set of thesis outline points, major points, and a couple minor points under each. Those minor points coming out of the key words. Then that pushes you into this final thesis statement. I do want to make one comment though. Notice that in this thesis statement, there are no references to the subpoints, just the primary Roman numeral points. There's no detail. If you start referencing the details under it, you're into your introduction, and that's not the purpose of the thesis statement. Any questions on the thesis statement? Of course, you'll be presenting your first draft of your thesis statement, and we'll be picking on it till the end of the paper. Creating balance for your thesis outline. Okay, balance simply means that the content of your paper under each Roman numeral point is properly balanced so that the points that you have pretty much have the same weight overall. Now, I'd like to touch on a couple of things here first. Defining balance. Again, balance is having sufficient research for the Roman numeral topic areas by weight of the importance of your topic. Now, I am saying that because it's possible that you have a Roman numeral topic point, that is significant and it deserves the ranking of being a Roman numeral topic point, but the nature of that topic is such that satisfying that information can be done with more modest research findings. So this weight of importance to your topic, it's a little bit subjective, and that's where I'll help you in terms of evaluating your work from the beginning. But as you're beginning to look at it for yourself, you recognize that sometimes a Roman numeral topic may have less, it could be even slightly substantially less information, but the importance of that segment is significant, and yet the substance of that information isn't necessarily equally voluminous, as it were, to some of the other points that you're making. Okay. Second point here: the thesis outline must be modified based upon the research substance and volume. Okay. You need to go through a process of revising your thesis outline to the substance and volume. Now, I had a little difficulty in knowing whether I should discuss balance first or balance last, because there's an aspect to which balance is something you keep in mind as you're going through those other steps that we talked about. Okay, you're going to look at your cards and you're going to sort your cards and kind of look at what you have, and you're going to be keeping balance in mind as you're working to revising those limiting questions and coming up with a new thesis outline. So it's a part of that whole process, and I'll take you through it a little bit in terms of a practical aspect of it. But important realization here is that you modify it based upon substance and volume. Two keywords. What do I mean by substance? Okay, substance means the actual material I found and the significance of that material. Okay, when material is substantive, it's significant. Okay, that helps decide what's going to be a Roman numeral point, and I'm going to have everything for this point that relates to that substantive point of view, and I'm going to put that information under. The second thing is volume, the amount of material that you have. It's never going to happen that in all of your research you had Roman numeral 1 and you found one card for it. It's never going to happen that that's going to remain a Roman numeral. Simply not going to happen, because it's not substantial enough. Now, if you have 10 cards and every other section has 50, you look at the substance of those 10 cards and you ask the question, is the question these substantial points are answering significant to the whole big picture of the topic? And if it is, you leave it in there. But then you have a problem if you have other sections that have 50, 75 cards in the Roman numeral. You know, you have to ask a secondary question. Should I break these into two other Roman numeral points instead of leaving them all crammed into one section? So it begins to be evaluation, substance and volume. You take one Roman numeral point and you expand it and make two Roman numeral points, or three, when you can find 2 or 3 substantial points of issue that you found in that research, and so you're going to refer to it because it's substantial. And you're also going to tell me, while volume doesn't give you substance, it can point to it. So if I've got 75 cards on a topic point, unless those cards are completely meaningless and abstract, related to nothing, which is very rare that I've ever seen that happen, then you have to look at those keywords and say, you know, what's the nature of substance? To start looking at the different topic points, and you might find that you need to break these into 2 or 3 substantial points that relate to your paper. Points maybe you didn't have a limiting question for, but now you can reconsider and say, this should be plugged in there. And the next point is balance is corrected. You correct balance by either modifying your outline or getting additional research. That's the only 2 things that you can do. If your paper's not balanced, then you either need more information on that point, or you need to rewrite your outline so that point doesn't stick out as an unresearched point on the paper. Nothing's more meaningless in a paper to have a primary point that you don't cover, or that you just make a passing reference to. So you revise based upon the actual research that you've accomplished. So we're going to go through here a process called sorting. Sorting is a practical way to review balance. Let's look at practical steps balancing by evaluating balance by sorting. First of all, sort all your cards by using Roman numeral headings on the cards. and rubber bands to create the groupings, okay? So I take a set of cards like this, and I play cards with myself. Now here's why you want to use cards instead of have everything on the computer. You put Roman numeral 5, Roman numeral 5, Roman numeral 5. All I have is Roman numeral 5. Well, here's Roman numeral 4, Roman numeral 4, Roman numeral 4, Roman numeral 5, Roman numeral 5, Roman numeral 5. See, I'm already starting to see a balance problem here. Roman numeral 3. Roman numeral 2. Oh, they are in order. That's great. Almost all in order. More Roman numeral 3. More numeral 3. More 3, 3, 3. Oh, this is terrific. I love this. This is absolutely great. So let's pretend the student's finished researching, okay? I've got Roman numeral 3, 20 cards. I don't really know for sure because I didn't count. Roman numeral 5. Roman number 5. About 50 cards. Roman numeral 2. 10. Roman numeral 3, 2. There's no Roman numeral 1. Now, we've got a balance problem at this point, okay? Now, assuming the research is finished, just a minute. Assuming research is finished, we've got to reconstruct the outline based on this. Question from the student in embarrassment.
When you're researching and you get points for when you get research for points like there aren't points for some points, but then you find out that one or two of your points points in your thesis outline, they don't make any. I mean, they aren't irrelevant. But you had already written the Roman numeral on your cards, and so then you have to change your outline.
Mm-hmm.
How do you try to keep the same Roman numerals for those points, and then or do we have to change
well,
cards too?
The question is, when you get to the place and you have this imbalance in your research, how do you go back through the process? And if I need to, I can go rerun back through the discussion. But basically, what your actual research controls your paper at this point. Okay, so you're going to have to, like that section. Let's say you end up the whole research and you only have 2 cards for that one section. Well, that's not a section. So you're either going to merge those cards into another section properly in a meaningful fashion, or you're going to throw them in the wastebasket. Well, you're not going to throw them in the wastebasket. You're going to set them aside so I can see them and you can get credit for them. But you're not going to use them. You're going to discard them from writing the paper. But that whole process gets judged by the research that you've actually done. That's why keywords become so essential to what's going on, because once you start getting that information gathered together, you realize, well, you got 50 cards on point 5. Maybe we can break that into more than one segment. But again, at this point, notice that you have the structure of your thesis question outline to help you do the research. You do the research. Now you have the substance of your research to organize. So you begin by sorting, like I just did, into the specific areas, and you look at what you've got. And you're going to have to, the second kind of sorting that you do is you get them rubber banded and set aside, you take one group, and then you sort by keywords. Now, if you're extremely creative, so that you never remembered or even cared to repeat any keyword with any card, so that there's a wide variance with all your keywords, then you're going to have to look for similarity in your keywords to sort of put together those subsections, those subpoints. But you go ahead and here you use colored paper clips. Well, actually, colored paper clips are preferred, but you do have to at least use paper clips because you're segmenting the particular keywords as you go on. For the third point is look at the visual number of cards in each section. Are they balanced to each other? Now, the students' cards that I just went through, were they balanced? 50, 30, 10, and 2? No, they weren't balanced. But yours aren't going to be balanced either. I don't know that anybody's ever done a research paper that their research was balanced when they were done. And part of it, what happens is you get caught up in something you're really interested in and you do all your research in that area. And so you're going to have to modify the focus of your research paper based on the actual research that you've accomplished. You're going to determine the proper balance by the significance of the topic and the amount of research that you have. Okay, no, by topic area, I'm meaning your Roman numeral point. And you're going to have to make some objective and subjective evaluations of what that is. Number 5, if the cards are minimal, research may be adequate, but you may need to move this little bit of information into another section of another Roman numeral. And I should have said you should, or you can drop the card. Oh, I say it, okay. Otherwise, drop the section or do more research. Now, a couple times people have a really important point, they didn't do any research on it yet, and they've got to do the research that's out there. They haven't finished doing the research, and so you've got to do that extra research.
Yeah, on the outline that we had done, they had, you know, the Roman numerals, and so when I started doing my research, some of the Roman numerals didn't mean it. I mean, they were irrelevant, but when I was doing the cards, I had already put a Roman numeral for that point, and so do I have to change the numeral on the card, or you know?
Okay, that's a real practical question, and this is especially for those people who are by video. The question is, if you're halfway through your research and all of a sudden you're really just trying to go and balance, and there's an irrelevant point or two, and you've already got your cards made up, you know, should you make some changes? And here's the answer: it's up to you, but if you can start recognizing a difference, it's not going to take you long to go through 50 cards and break them into 2 groups and change the Roman numerals on it. It's not going to be too hard to do that. My suggestion is you go ahead and do it now before you finish your research, because it's going to help you sort through the balance of your research more adequately. Again, the purpose of having a preset Roman numeral outline is to help you sort through the research process as you're reading and finding cards and finding information and properly categorizing it as you go. So when you've made some substantial recognition that there's a change due, go ahead and make the change. That's always suitable to change in flow. However, it's not. I'm not going to mandate it. I'm not going to, make it an assignment that gets graded. And if you wait until you've done all your research to regroup your cards, that's when you do it. But my suggestion is, as soon as you begin to catch on, my questions aren't really pertinent, rework it and work from that new outline. Any other questions? Good question. Okay, so you're going to evaluate all your research by sorting. And again, just to recap on this point, you're going to be doing this in the process of writing your thesis outline. And maybe it would have been more suitable for me to have it first. I originally had balance first, and I thought, well, that's going to create confusion because it's, so I put it at the end, and maybe I should have left it at first point. So here's some illustrations on balance. This is 3 Roman numeral points with, pretty clear equitability, about 50 cards per, you'll never have it that even, but that's kind of an illustration. And you would say by looking, well, that's pretty balanced by visual. Or you might have a major point that has more significant information and it's longer section, but then the section before or after is somewhat modified. Again, that's still balanced. Or you might have a paper that has, some variable differences, but it kind of crescendos. Again, all 3 of these diagrams just illustrate stack sizes, okay? And I would say all these are relatively balanced. Okay, that's the end of our class today, unless you have any further questions. Anybody have any further questions about how you work up your thesis outline? Yes?
For the thesis outline, when you have your limiting questions and they're in the common groups, looking at one of the slides.
Right.
It says definitions and examples of compromise. What is being compromised and examples of compromise. Are we allowed to put them as questions? She has one of them as questions.
Okay, in terms of the actual structure of the paper?
No, for just the outline right here.
Okay, let me go back and see if I can find it. I wish I could go it faster. Okay.
Yes, that one.
What is being compromised? Okay, should you leave it as a question? The great question. The question is, since you're creating a thesis outline, which is primarily statement, not questions, should you have questions? What is being compromised? In this particular point, it's something that got through the grid, but it's better to answer that question. What is being compromised? Okay, and to make the statement. This is what's being compromised. Scripture is being compromised, so try to turn around each question into an answer. So I'm really thankful that you noticed that particular error, and that's a little bit of a, it got through on this particular structure because I actually took it under definitions and examples of compromised. She's going to tell me what is being compromised. She's going to give me examples of compromised. So the real need for this particular slide, for its actual use, is to, I'll go here and change it before the other class gets it. I'll just put a period where we have a question mark, save it, and go back to the picture. What is being compromised? That's a statement. She's going to tell me what's being compromised, examples of compromise, and literal interpretation. So thank you for affecting my punctuation. Any other questions? Yes.
I have another one. And using that slide, she has underneath, like, what is being compromised, examples of compromise, and those would be considered the capital letters then?
Yeah, those will become the capital letters. And
can we put those in our thesis statement? Because she lists like children in her thesis statement. Can we reference them, or do we only use the?
well, again, here's what is important with the thesis question, okay? These 3 points need to be directly or indirectly related, okay? And these subpoints are not to be specifically referred to, and by specifically meaning you're not developing them in any way. Now, in the process of explaining there's dangers of compromise, and you state there's dangers of compromise are to Christians and their children, in their culture, it's okay if it's simply clarifying this main point. But if it starts to delineate in detail and create its own sense of flow, it's inappropriate, okay? And that's the difference between, I think I can go back to the question, comment. Wait a minute. Sorry, I'm taking so much time. Okay. When you're creating the thesis statement, what I tried to emphasize here is that each of your Roman numeral statements should be referred to directly or indirectly, and you're focusing on that particular thing, not the details beyond it. So you're avoiding introducing your topic, which is more specific detail, flower lingo, etc. But when you look at this next quick recap from the book, you're trying to express the main point, explain your attitude toward the topic, propose a path. Well, the path kind of relates to those 3 Roman numeral points she has, but explaining her attitude towards the topic, she's clarifying, well, compromise has effects for children, for you, for your children, for society, and so her mentioning that in that particular fashion just simply helps to explain. So it fits into the purpose of the thesis statement, but again, it might sound like I'm straining at a gnat, but there's a distinct difference between having a simple expression of how your attitude is being portrayed versus stepping over the boundary and starting to get substantive detail for each of your subpoints crammed into your thesis statement. And again, in the end, it's a little bit subjective between you and I when we're wrapping up your paper. The nature of your writing style, your topic, and the points that you're trying to get across will sort of judge whether you're going to be explaining, or I'm going to call it expressing or explaining, or whether it's going to be considered more detail and going beyond what's supposed to happen in that. Thank you. Very good question. Anyone else have questions? You're asking questions for people who aren't here, so feel free to ask a question. There's no question that makes no sense. Just my answers don't make sense. So okay, oops, back here. Next session. Okay, here's your homework assignment. Please pay attention to this. I want you to reread pages 22 to 34, okay? That's going to just kind of be a recap to go through this whole process again. And the book was a little different in its presentation, so reading this again will be beneficial to you. You're going to need to have all your 150 cards due by next time. For people who have excused absences from this particular deadline, it's important that everybody has all their research caught up, done by that next particular class as much as possible. There is a latitude in the early part of the course, but once we get into March, I don't have latitude for deadlines. So if you've had an excused absence and you're a little behind, don't panic. You'll be able to kind of catch up as we go, but keep that March deadline in view, because I can't start bending the deadline after that point. Make sure you have your complete thesis statement and a complete working outline. And if you have 200 cards or more, there'll be some consideration given for extra credit. That's it. Any more questions before we dismiss? Thank you very much.